Are my grandchildren hybrids? The alien queen was shocked to learn that her daughter had married a human. The transport ship's landing gear had barely settled on the palace courtyard when Lyra's stomach attempted to relocate itself somewhere near her throat. 5 years. 5 entire years since she'd last stood on home soil, and apparently her body had decided this was the perfect moment to remind her that courage and nausea were not mutually exclusive states of being. "You're doing the thing," Thomas observed from beside her, his hand warm against her lower back. "The breathing pattern you use before council presentations? Want me to tell you the joke about the quantum physicist who walked into 2 bars? "You've told me that joke 17 times, Lyra said, though she appreciated the attempt at distraction. Through the viewport, she could see the palace rising before them, all crimson spires and crystalline architecture that caught their binary sun's light and fractured it into impossible colors. Home. The word felt foreign after so long on Earth, where everything was smaller, greener, and significantly less likely to spontaneously glow. "I'm going to throw up," Arya announced cheerfully from her crash seat, swinging her legs with the carefree energy of someone too young to comprehend imminent political disaster. "You always say that after hyperspace transitions," Thomas replied, performing a final check of Ethan's safety restraints. "And you never actually throw up. There's a first time for everything. That's what you told me about trying Brussels sprouts." "Fair point, though I stand by my position that Brussels sprouts are objectively terrible and humanity's greatest culinary mistake." Lyra closed her eyes, trying to center herself the way her meditation instructors had taught her decades ago. "Find your core. Breathe through the chaos. Remember that you are the inheritor of 3,000 years of carefully cultivated psionic discipline in political training." These mental exercises had sustained her through trade negotiations, diplomatic crises, and that memorable incident with the Krillian ambassador who'd gotten drunk on fermented Kelbar root and challenged her to an honor duel. They were significantly less effective when applied to the prospect of introducing your human husband and hybrid children to your mother, the terrifying queen who probably thought you were dead. The ship's door cycled open with a pneumatic hiss that sounded uncomfortably like the universe sighing in resignation. Beyond it, the palace guards stood in perfect formation, 20 soldiers in ceremonial armor that looked impressive and completely impractical for actual combat. Their psionic pikes hummed with contained energy, more for show than defense. The palace hadn't faced a genuine threat in 70 years, but tradition demanded displays of martial readiness regardless of relevance. "Is that lady made of rubies?" Arya whispered, her violet eyes wide as she took in the captain of the guard, whose scarlet skin gleamed like polished gemstone in the afternoon light. "That's melanin expression combined with copper-based blood chemistry," Thomas said in his patient teacher voice. The one that had apparently survived the transition from Wisconsin high school to interstellar culture shock. Very different biological process from Earth gemstones, though the visual similarity is striking. "We talked about this, remember?" "I remember. I just think she looks like a really fancy rock." Lyra stifled a laugh that wanted to escape as hysteria. Her 4-year-old daughter had just compared the palace guard captain to decorative geology, and they hadn't even reached the actual throne room yet. This was going wonderfully. Ethan, blissfully unaware of social complexity, had discovered that the ship's interior panels made interesting sounds when tapped rhythmically. He was working his way through what might have been a song or might have been random noise. With 3-year-olds, the distinction was often academic. Then he vanished. "Oh no," Thomas said with the weary resignation of someone who dealt with this exact scenario at least 40 times. "Lyra, he's doing the thing again." The boy reappeared 3 seconds later, sitting on the captain of the guard's shoulders, having apparently decided that teleporting onto a heavily armed soldier's head was a reasonable course of action. The captain, to her credit, didn't move. Her hand didn't even twitch toward her weapon. She simply stood there, expression frozen somewhere between professional composure and complete bewilderment, with a human toddler now treating her ceremonial helmet as a convenient perch. "Shiny," Ethan announced, patting the helmet with both hands. "I like it. Can I keep it?" "Ethan Marcus, you teleport yourself back here right now," Thomas called, his voice carrying that particular tone of parental authority that somehow worked across the species' boundaries. "We talked about this. No teleporting onto strangers, Especially not armed strangers. Especially not armed strangers who work for Grandma. But she's shiny, Ethan protested, as if this explained everything. From his perspective, it probably did. Lyra moved quickly, reaching up to lift her son from his unauthorized position. I am so sorry, Captain Varix. He's still learning to control his spatial displacement abilities. It's been a challenging developmental phase. Captain Varix's expression suggested she was rapidly recalculating every assumption she'd ever made about royal protocol. Princess Lyra, welcome home. I see you've been busy during your extended diplomatic mission. That's one way to describe it, Lyra agreed, settling Ethan on her hip where he couldn't easily teleport without taking her with him. This is my husband, Thomas, and our children, Arya and Ethan. Everyone, this is Captain Varix, who has served the Royal Guard since before I was born, and who is being remarkably patient about the whole teleporting child situation. I've dealt with worse, Varix said, though her tone suggested this was definitely in her top 5 unexpected incidents. The Queen is expecting you in the throne room. She's been waiting for 3 hours. She's very excited to see you. The way she emphasized excited made it clear that alternative interpretations of the Queen's emotional state might be more accurate. Excited is good, Thomas said optimistically. Excited means engaged, interested, emotionally invested in the outcome. That's better than indifferent, right? Your husband is very positive, Varix observed. He teaches teenagers, Lyra explained. It requires pathological optimism and the ability to find hope in fundamentally chaotic situations. Both skills have proven surprisingly transferable to navigating interspecies marriage and raising hybrid children. They proceeded through the palace corridors, their small family unit trailing guards who looked increasingly uncertain about protocol. Did hybrid children receive royal courtesies? Did human consorts? Was there a specific formation for escorting family members who could randomly teleport? The guards settled on a loose configuration that suggested they were making it up as they went along, which seemed appropriate given that everyone was making it up as they went along. Arya held Lyra's free hand, her white hair catching the bioluminescent light that pulsed gently through the walls. Mama, why does the building glow? Is it magic? Symbiotic organisms integrated into the architecture, Thomas answered before Lyra could. They consume ambient carbon dioxide and produce light as a metabolic byproduct. Extremely efficient building system. I've been trying to explain it to the engineering department at home, but the resource requirements for implementation on Earth are currently prohibitive. So, magic, Arya concluded. Sufficiently advanced biology indistinguishable from magic? Yes. The throne room doors stood before them, 20 feet of carved obsidian that depicted the founding of the Crimson Dominion in elaborate relief. Lyra had studied these carvings as a child, memorizing every detail of her civilization's history. Now they felt like a judgment. All those ancestors, all that tradition, all those carefully maintained bloodlines, about to encounter evidence that their descendant had cheerfully ignored every rule they'd died to establish. Ready? Thomas asked softly. Absolutely not, Lyra admitted. Let's do this anyway. The door swung open and Lyra stepped forward into her mother's presence, her human husband at her side, her hybrid children in her arms, and no plan whatsoever beyond honesty. The universe had presented her with an impossible situation, and she'd responded by creating an impossible family. Now came the part where she found out whether love could actually conquer deeply entrenched political protocols, or whether she just made a catastrophic mistake that would haunt multiple star systems. Either way, Ethan was probably going to teleport onto something inappropriate before this conversation ended. Lyra had accepted this as inevitable. Some things transcended species boundaries, and toddler chaos was apparently universal. Queen Valendra sat motionless on her throne, a figure carved from controlled fury and 3,000 years of accumulated royal precedent. Her scarlet skin seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, creating an aura of darkness that made the crystalline chamber feel smaller than its actual dimensions. Lyra had forgotten how her mother could make a room shrink through sheer presence alone, how silence could become a weapon when wielded with sufficient expertise. You're late, Valendra said, her voice cutting through the throne room like a blade through vacuum. I specified 1400 hours local time. It is now 1700 hours. 3 hours, Lyra. I have been sitting here for 3 hours contemplating the various reasons my daughter might keep her queen waiting. Hyperspace navigation isn't an exact science, Thomas offered helpfully. We hit some gravitational turbulence near the Kepler 442 system that threw off our calculations. I actually have some fascinating data about spatial distortion effects if you'd like to. I would not. Valendra's gaze fixed on Thomas with the intensity of a targeting laser. You are the human. Guilty as charged, Thomas agreed. Thomas Marcus, secondary school history teacher, amateur astronomer, and apparently your son-in-law. Nice to meet you. Love what you've done with the palace. The bioluminescent integration is really impressive. Do the organisms require specific maintenance protocols, or are they self-sustaining? Lyra closed her eyes. Her husband was attempting to discuss architecture with her mother. Her mother, who once stared down a trade delegation until they apologized for existing in her presence. This was either catastrophically brave or catastrophically stupid, and Lyra genuinely couldn't determine which. Self-sustaining, Valendra answered after a pause that lasted approximately 17 years. They metabolize atmospheric gases and reproduce through binary fission. They have maintained the palace infrastructure for 6 centuries with minimal intervention. That's incredible. We've been trying to develop similar systems on Earth, but our atmospheric composition creates challenges for... Mother, Lyra interrupted, before Thomas could launch into a full lecture on comparative xenobiology. I know I have violated approximately 17 different protocols by being here. I know the Bloodline Preservation Act expressly forbids genetic hybridization with non-approved species. I know that my extended absence without communication was unforgivable. But before you pass judgment, I need you to meet your grandchildren. She stepped forward, still carrying Ethan, while Aria emerged from behind her father's legs with the cautious curiosity of a child who could sense emotional turbulence, but didn't quite understand its source. Valendra's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Are my grandchildren hybrids? Yes, Lyra said, lifting her chin. And they're magnificent. I can count to 103 languages, Arya announced, apparently deciding this was relevant information. Also, I can make things float sometimes, but Daddy says I'm not supposed to do it inside because last time I accidentally floated the cat and she was very upset about it. You have a cat, Valendra repeated slowly, as if this was the strangest revelation in a conversation already overflowing with strange revelations. Colonel Whiskers, Thomas confirmed. Arya named her. I tried explaining that military ranks don't traditionally apply to household pets, but I was overruled by a very determined 4-year-old. The cat outranks you? The cat outranks everyone. It's become an accepted fact of our household hierarchy. Something that might have been amusement crossed Valendra's face before being ruthlessly suppressed. She descended from her throne with deliberate steps, each movement calculated for maximum dramatic effect. Lyra had watched her mother do this hundreds of times, the slow approach designed to make petitioners squirm, to remind them of the vast gulf between queen and subject. It had never been directed at her before. Valendra stopped 3 paces away, studying Arya with the same intensity she'd once used to evaluate treaty proposals. You have your mother's hair. And your eyes, Arya replied, meeting her grandmother's gaze without flinching. Mama showed me pictures. Your eyes are purple like mine. Also, you look angry. Are you angry? Ethan says you feel sad, but he's only 3, so he might be wrong. Ethan can sense emotions? Valendra's attention shifted to the boy still perched on Lyra's hip, who was systematically attempting to eat his own shirt collar while radiating contentment. Empathic abilities, Lyra confirmed. They manifested early, much earlier than they should. Dr. Chen at the Earth Genetic Research Institute believes the hybrid neurology creates novel connections between... You've been discussing our psionic heritage with human scientists. Valendra's voice could have frozen nitrogen. I've been discussing my children with anyone who could help me understand them, Lyra corrected. Hybrid genetics don't follow our documented patterns. The abilities manifest unpredictably. Arya demonstrated telekinesis at 18 months. Ethan's spatial displacement started during his terrible 2s, which has been educational in ways I never anticipated. He teleports during tantrums. Exclusively to the pantry, Thomas added. We think he's subconsciously seeking comfort food, which suggests his empathic abilities are linked to his own emotional regulation systems. It's actually quite logical from a developmental psychology perspective, though it does make childproofing significantly more complicated. Valendra knelt, bringing herself level with Arya. Up close, the resemblance was striking. The same bone structure, the same violet eyes, separated by generations and species, boundaries but connected through something deeper than genetics. What else can you do, small one? Arya considered the question with appropriate seriousness. I'm very good at drawing. I can tie my own shoes most of the time. I know all the planets in Earth's solar system and also the planets in our system, which is confusing because they have different names in different languages. And sometimes when I concentrate really hard, I can hear what people are thinking. But Mama says that's rude, so I'm not supposed to do it without asking first. Telepathy. Valendra glanced at Lyra. At 4 years old. It's inconsistent, Lyra said quickly. More like emotional impressions than actual thoughts. But yes, she's demonstrated limited telepathic reception. We're working with her on consent and boundaries. We have a whole chart system, Thomas explained. Green thoughts are okay to listen to. Yellow thoughts require permission. Red thoughts are private, even if you can hear them. It's based on the traffic light model we use for teaching emotional regulation. Arya's therapist suggested, your daughter has a therapist. All our children have therapists, Thomas said, as if this was completely obvious. Raising hybrid kids with unpredictable psionic abilities in a world that doesn't have existing frameworks for their experience creates unique psychological challenges. Professional support seemed prudent. Valendra stood, and for a long moment she simply stared at Thomas with an expression Lyra couldn't quite parse. Then impossibly her mother laughed. Not the controlled amusement appropriate for court functions, but actual laughter that echoed through the throne room and made the assembled advisors look collectively scandalized. You are the strangest creature I have ever encountered, Valendra said. My daughter violates centuries of tradition, produces hybrid grandchildren with impossible abilities, disappears for 5 years, and returns with a human who wants to discuss therapy frameworks and traffic light behavioral models in my throne room. I know it's unconventional, Thomas admitted, but in my defense, I'm operating completely outside my cultural context here. I'm defaulting to what I know, which is primarily teenage psychology, Wisconsin history, and how to grow really good tomatoes. If any of those skill sets are useful in navigating intergalactic family drama, I'm happy to contribute. Tomatoes, Valendra repeated. Best you'll ever taste. My grandmother's seeds. I've been growing them on Earth, and I brought some with us because I thought, well, I didn't really think, honestly. I just packed things that felt like home, and tomatoes made the list. Ethan chose this moment to teleport out of Lyra's arms and reappear directly in front of Valendra, his small face scrunched in concentration. He reached out and patted her knee with sticky hands that had definitely been in his mouth moments before. Sad, he announced with the absolute certainty of the very young. Scared. Miss people. Valendra froze, staring down at the child who had just articulated emotions she'd spent 5 years refusing to acknowledge. Your son is reading my emotional resonance. We tried to teach him about privacy boundaries, Thomas said apologetically. But he's 3. Executive function is still developing. Also, he really likes meeting new people, and apparently evaluating their emotional state is his way of saying hello. He says I'm sad, Valendra said softly, and for the first time since Lyra had entered the throne room, her mother's absolute control wavered. He says I miss people. You held memorial services for me, Lyra said quietly. Thomas found the public records. You declared me dead after 3 years of silence. You mourned me, Mother. Of course I mourned you. Valendra's voice cracked, centuries of royal composure fracturing around the edges. You were my daughter. You disappeared. I thought I'd lost you the way I lost your father. And now you return with a family I never knew existed. With grandchildren who can read my emotions and teleport onto inappropriate surfaces, with a human who wants to discuss tomatoes, and I don't know whether to embrace you or exile you or simply sit down because my legs suddenly feel unreliable. Sitting is good, Thomas suggested. I recommend sitting. Maybe we all sit and talk like actual people instead of political entities. The throne room, which had hosted formal ceremonies for 3 millennia, suddenly became a place where people sat on the floor. Valendra lowered herself with the careful dignity of someone trying to maintain composure, while everything they understood about protocol collapsed around them. Lyra joined her, then Thomas, creating a small circle of informality in the middle of crystalline perfection. The court advisors looked collectively ready to faint. "This is highly irregular," someone whispered from the shadows near the eastern colonnade. "Kelrin, if you're going to comment, do it where I can see you," Valendra said without turning her head. "Lurking in corners makes you look suspicious." A tall figure emerged, his long ears twitching with barely suppressed excitement. "Your Majesty, I wasn't lurking. I was observing. There's a significant difference from a scientific methodology standpoint." "This is Kelrin, our chief science advisor," Lyra told Thomas. "He's brilliant, has no social awareness whatsoever, and once accidentally set his own laboratory on fire trying to prove a theory about combustion in low-oxygen environments." "The fire proved my hypothesis was correct," Kelrin protested. "That the laboratory was inside the fire was an unfortunate side effect." "How do you accidentally put a laboratory inside a fire?" Thomas asked with genuine curiosity. "Poor spatial planning and excessive enthusiasm. The formal inquiry cited 17 separate safety violations, though I maintain that 14 of them were technically suggestions rather than actual regulations." Arya had discovered that the obsidian floor was remarkably slippery and had begun sliding across it in her socks, making small, pleased sounds with each successful glide. "Mama, can we get floors like this at home? These are way better than hardwood." "Our floors are fine," Lyra said, though she watched her daughter with obvious affection. "And you're going to fall and crack your head open." "That's what you said about the tree climbing, and I only fell twice." "Twice is 2 times too many." "Mathematically accurate, but experientially limiting," Arya replied, which was definitely something she'd learned from Thomas. Ethan had settled into Valendra's lap with the confidence of someone who had never encountered a person who didn't immediately love him. He was systematically examining her ceremonial jewelry, his small fingers tracing the intricate metalwork with fascinated attention. "Pretty. Shiny. Heavy." "Very heavy," Valendra confirmed. "This necklace alone weighs 3 kilograms. It's made from compressed stellar matter harvested from a dying star system 600 years ago. Wearing it is essentially a continuous neck-strengthening exercise." "Why wear heavy things if they hurt?" "Tradition," Valendra said, then paused. "Actually, that's a reasonable question. Why do we maintain traditions that cause physical discomfort?" "Kelrin, make a note. I want a full analysis of ceremonial garment weight distribution and its impact on long-term skeletal health." "I'll add it to the list," Kelrin said, his datapad already out. "Right after the hybrid genetics study, the architectural bioluminescence efficiency review, and the investigation into why the Eastern Wing's climate control keeps making that clicking sound." Thomas had been studying the throne room ceiling with the focused attention of someone trying to work out a particularly complex problem. The crystalline matrix in the support structures, is that naturally occurring or artificially grown? "Artificially grown," Kelrin answered before Valendra could. "We seed microscopic crystal structures in a nutrient solution and use directed psionic energy to guide their development. Takes approximately 40 years to grow a single support column. The throne room took 3 centuries to complete." "That's incredible. We have similar crystal growing techniques on Earth, but nothing at this scale. The energy requirements alone must be enormous. How do you maintain stability during the growth process?" "Rotating teams of psionic specialists focusing harmonic resonance patterns through..." Kelrin stopped, his eyes widening. "Wait, you actually understand what I'm talking about?" "I teach physics to 16-year-olds who would rather be literally anywhere else," Thomas said. "I've developed detailed explanations for complex scientific concepts. Also, I read a lot. Lyra's been sharing technical documentation with me for years. I may not have psionic abilities, but I can understand the principles." Kelrin looked at Valendra with something approaching religious fervor. "Your Majesty, can we keep him? I've been trying to explain harmonic resonance to the junior advisors for 3 years, and they just nod politely while clearly thinking about lunch. This human actually cares about crystal architecture." "He's not a pet, Kelrin." "I know, but he's interested in science. Do you know how rare that is in this court? Everyone's obsessed with politics and bloodlines and who insulted whom at the last state dinner. This human wants to discuss energy distribution in crystalline matrices. I'm right here, Thomas said mildly. Also, I prefer being referred to by name rather than this human. It makes me feel like a specimen. Sorry, Thomas wants to discuss crystalline matrices. Can he visit my laboratory? I have 17 ongoing experiments that would benefit from fresh perspective, particularly someone trained in alternative scientific frameworks. Lyra laughed. Kelrin, you can't just recruit my husband for your research projects 5 minutes after meeting him. Why not? Time is a valuable resource. We should optimize its usage. Because there are social protocols for these things. Social protocols are inefficient, Kelrin muttered, but he backed away, still looking at Thomas like he'd discovered a particularly fascinating mineral sample. Valendra watched this exchange with an expression that suggested her understanding of the universe was undergoing rapid restructuring. Your husband befriends science advisors within minutes of arrival. He befriends everyone, Lyra said. It's pathological. Last year, he accidentally became best friends with our neighbor, who initially complained about Ethan teleporting into his garden. Now they have weekly coffee meetings where they discuss Earth history and comparative cultural development. Thomas turns adversaries into allies through sheer persistent niceness. That sounds exhausting. It really is, Thomas agreed cheerfully. But I found that most conflict stems from misunderstanding, and most misunderstanding stems from not talking to each other like actual people. Also, I genuinely find people interesting. Everyone has a story. Even the neighbor who initially threatened to call authorities about the teleporting toddler turned out to have fascinating perspectives on pre-unification Earth politics. Arya had abandoned her floor sliding to investigate the throne itself, climbing its obsidian surface with unsettling ease. Grandmother, why is your chair so big? You're not that tall. The throne is designed to project authority through scale, Valendra explained. It makes the monarch appear larger, more imposing, more worthy of respect. That's silly. People should respect you because you're nice, not because you have a big chair. Your granddaughter has opinions about monarchical presentation. She has opinions about everything, Lyra said. Yesterday, she spent 20 minutes arguing that bedtime is a social construct designed to oppress children. Her reasoning was surprisingly sophisticated. Bedtime is oppressive, Arya called from her position halfway up the throne. Adults stay up late doing whatever they want. Children have to sleep at arbitrary times determined by parental authority figures who claim it's for our own good, but really it's just a power structure maintaining generational hierarchy. Thomas covered his face with his hand. I should not have let her attend that sociology lecture at the university. You took your 4-year-old to a university sociology lecture? She was interested in social structures. The professor was discussing institutional power dynamics. I thought it would be educational. I did not anticipate her applying critical theory to bedtime enforcement. Valendra found herself doing something she hadn't done in the throne room in years. She smiled. Not the controlled diplomatic smile appropriate for official functions, but genuine amusement that transformed her face. You have created philosophically argumentative hybrid children who question fundamental assumptions about authority. We prefer to think of it as encouraging critical thinking skills, Lyra said. It's absolutely going to make your lives more difficult. It already has. Last week, Arya staged a protest about vegetable consumption requirements. She made signs. Broccoli is Tyranny was particularly well designed from a graphic arts perspective. Ethan, who had been quietly content in Valendra's lap, suddenly looked up at her with serious eyes. You're not scary anymore. You were scared, but now you're happy. That's good. Happy is better. Valendra felt something crack in her chest, some carefully maintained wall built over years of ruling, of maintaining distance, of protecting herself from vulnerability. This small hybrid child, this impossible combination of her daughter and a species she'd barely acknowledged as sentient 5 years ago, had somehow seen through 3,000 years of accumulated royal armor to the lonely woman underneath. Yes, she said softly, her hand settling on Ethan's dark hair. Happy is better. I had forgotten that. A commotion at the throne room's entrance interrupted what had become the strangest royal audience in recorded history. Captain Varix appeared, looking distinctly uncomfortable, followed by a tall woman whose scarlet skin bore the distinctive silver markings of the Council of Bloodlines. Behind her, three more council members filed in with the grim determination of people arriving to prevent a catastrophe that had already occurred. "Your Majesty," the silver-marked woman began, her voice carrying the particular tone of someone about to cite regulations. "We received word of Princess Lyra's arrival. Given the circumstances, the council felt immediate consultation was necessary regarding—" She stopped abruptly as she registered the scene before her. The Queen of the Crimson Dominion sat on the floor holding a human child. Princess Lyra sat beside her with a human male. A white-haired hybrid girl was climbing the sacred throne like it was recreational equipment. The entire composition violated so many protocols simultaneously that the council member's brain appeared to temporarily malfunction. "Councillor Thren," Valendra said pleasantly, "how delightful of you to arrive uninvited to my private family reunion. I wasn't aware the council now dictates when and how I interact with my grandchildren." "Grandchildren," Thren repeated, the word emerging strangled. Her gaze fixed on Ethan, then Arya, then back to Ethan as if hoping one of them might disappear if she blinked hard enough. "Those are hybrid offspring. Congratulations on your observational skills," Valendra said. "Yes, these are my grandchildren. Arya, please come down from the throne before you give Councillor Thran a complete breakdown. We can discuss climbing privileges later." "But I was almost to the top," Arya protested. "You can finish your architectural exploration another time. Right now we have guests, and apparently we need to have a tedious conversation about genetics and legal frameworks." Arya slid down reluctantly, landing with surprising grace beside Thomas. "Are these the people who make all the rules Mama says are outdated and need revision?" Thren's expression suggested she'd just been insulted by a small child and wasn't quite sure how to process it. "The Bloodline Preservation Act has maintained our species' psionic integrity for 3,000 years. It is hardly outdated." 3,000 years sounds pretty old to me," Arya observed. "Daddy says laws should evolve with new information. That's how science works. You make a hypothesis, test it, and update your understanding based on results. Your hypothesis was that mixing genetics would weaken abilities, but I can move things with my mind and I'm only 4. That's pretty strong results against your hypothesis." Thomas looked torn between pride and horror. "Arya, maybe let the adults handle the complex legal debate. You said I should always speak up when I notice logical inconsistencies. I'm beginning to regret that particular parenting choice." One of the other council members, an older male with ceremonial scars marking his face, stepped forward. "The child makes an interesting point, actually. If hybrid offspring demonstrate enhanced or novel psionic capabilities, that would indeed challenge our fundamental assumptions about genetic preservation." "Thank you, Councillor Draven, for acknowledging basic logic," Lyra said. "My children are living proof that our understanding of genetics is incomplete. Arya demonstrated telekinesis at 18 months. Ethan can sense emotions at 3 years old and teleport short distances. These aren't diminished abilities. They're accelerated development patterns we don't fully understand. Or they're dangerous anomalies that could destabilize carefully maintained genetic lines," Thren countered. "We have protocols for a reason. Uncontrolled hybridization could introduce unpredictable variables into—" "I'm not a variable," Arya interrupted, her violet eyes flashing. "I'm a person, and that lady is being mean about me existing, which seems really rude considering I didn't ask to be born." "I just am." Silence fell over the throne room. Even Thren seemed momentarily disarmed by the simple clarity of a child pointing out that her existence was being debated like a theoretical problem rather than a lived reality. Kelrin, who had been furiously taking notes on his datapad, spoke up. "From a purely scientific standpoint, the hybrid genetics present unprecedented research opportunities. The children demonstrate abilities that shouldn't be possible given our current understanding of psionic inheritance. Ethan's empathic manifestation at 3 years old alone warrants comprehensive study. We're observing the emergence of potentially entirely new expressions of psionic capability." "We're not studying my grandchildren like laboratory specimens," Valendra said sharply. "Kelrin, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but these are family members, not experiments." "I wasn't suggesting invasive research," Kelrin said quickly. "Just observational documentation and perhaps some voluntary neurological mapping if the parents consent and the children are comfortable, and we follow all ethical protocols, and he trailed off under Valendra's withering stare. I'll stop talking now. Thomas cleared his throat. If I may offer a perspective from someone who has absolutely no authority in this situation, but does have relevant experience, I've spent 5 years watching my children grow up navigating two completely different biological heritages. They're not dangerous. They're not anomalies. They're just kids who happen to have some really interesting abilities that we're helping them learn to manage responsibly. You're human, Thren said, as if this explained everything. You have no concept of the complexities involved in maintaining psionic bloodlines across generations. Your species has barely achieved basic spaceflight. What could you possibly understand about genetic heritage that spans millennia? Well, humans spent thousands of years fighting wars over who had the right bloodlines, Thomas replied evenly. Royalty, nobility, caste systems, racial purity doctrines. We tried all of it. Most of those systems caused tremendous suffering and were eventually abandoned when we realized that diversity actually strengthens species rather than weakening them. So I understand plenty about genetic heritage arguments. I just understand them from the perspective of someone whose civilization already learned this lesson the hard way. The throne room went very quiet. Lyra felt a surge of fierce pride watching her husband calmly explain human history to an alien council member who clearly expected him to be intellectually inferior. Thomas had this gift for making profound observations sound like casual conversation, for introducing revolutionary ideas as if they were merely interesting thoughts worth considering. Draven nodded slowly. And compelling historical parallel. Our own records show similar conflicts in our pre-spaceflight era. Genetic superiority arguments, bloodline wars, systematic exclusion of those deemed impure. We pride ourselves on having evolved beyond such primitive thinking. Yet here we are invoking those same concepts under the guise of scientific preservation. That's completely different, Thren protested. We're protecting documented psionic capabilities, not making arbitrary judgments about worth or... I can hear you thinking, Arya announced suddenly, her small face scrunched in concentration. You're really angry and also scared. You think my brother and me being born means something bad is happening, but we're not bad. We're just different. Thren stepped back as if physically struck. She's reading my thoughts. That's a violation of... She's 4 years old demonstrating telepathic reception that shouldn't manifest for another decade, Valendra interrupted, which rather proves the point that hybrid genetics produce unexpected capabilities. Now, Arya, what have we discussed about consent and mental privacy? That I should ask before listening to thoughts, Arya said, looking genuinely contrite. Sorry, but she was thinking really loud thoughts about us, and I got curious. Curiosity doesn't override consent. Apologize to Counselor Thren. I'm sorry I read your thoughts without asking, Arya said dutifully, even though they were about me and Ethan, which seems like they should be our business. But Mama says privacy rules apply anyway. Thren looked like she was having several crises simultaneously and couldn't decide which to address first. Ethan had grown bored with the adult conversation and was now attempting to teach himself to juggle using 3 decorative energy crystals he'd collected from a nearby display pedestal. Each crystal hummed with stored psionic energy, the kind typically used to power communication arrays across star systems. Watching a 3-year-old treat them like toys was giving several council members visible anxiety. Those are calibrated resonance crystals, one of the younger counselors said weakly. Each one costs approximately 7,000 credits. They're not really meant for... Ethan vanished mid-juggle. The crystals hung suspended in the air for a moment before clattering to the floor. 3 seconds later, the boy reappeared sitting on Counselor Draven's shoulders, having apparently decided this was an excellent vantage point. Shiny man has good view, Ethan announced, patting Draven's bald head with enthusiasm. I like it up here. Draven, to his credit, didn't move. Your grandson has remarkable spatial displacement accuracy for his age. That teleport was at least 15 meters, and he materialized precisely where he intended. Most initiates can't achieve that level of control until their 2nd decade. He practices constantly, Thomas said, moving to retrieve his son. Usually when we're trying to prevent him from practicing. Last month he teleported himself into the neighbor's house during dinner. Just appeared in their dining room, said hello, and asked if they had any cookies. I've never apologized so extensively in my life. Did they have cookies? Arya asked, priorities clearly established. They did, actually. Mrs. Patterson gave him 3 and sent him home with a lecture about boundaries and spatial intrusion, which is apparently the same lecture regardless of whether you're talking about human social norms or psionic ethics. Lyra stood, brushing off her ceremonial robes. Mother Council members, we can continue debating the theoretical implications of my children's existence, or we can address the actual situation. I'm not leaving. Thomas and I are married according to both Earth and Crimson Dominion legal frameworks. Yes, I filed the proper documentation with our interstellar embassy, Counselor Thren, before you ask. Our children exist. They're citizens of both worlds by birth. No amount of protocol discussion will change these facts. The Bloodline Preservation Act, Thren began, is 3,000 years old and contains no provisions for situations like this because our ancestors couldn't conceive of compatible hybridization with other species, Lyra interrupted. Legal frameworks that don't account for new realities aren't sacred texts. They're incomplete documents requiring amendment. Valendra rose from the floor with deliberate grace, still holding Ethan, who had teleported back to her arms. Lyra is correct. The Council can argue precedent all you want, but my grandchildren exist. The question isn't whether they should exist. They do. The question is how we adapt our society to include them. That's an incredibly radical position, Your Majesty, Thren said carefully. You're suggesting we rewrite fundamental laws because your daughter chose to violate them? I'm suggesting we rewrite outdated laws because reality has overtaken our assumptions, Valendra corrected. And yes, because my daughter proved our assumptions wrong. Sometimes radical revision is necessary. Our ancestors understood this, which is why our legal code includes amendment procedures. They anticipated that future generations might encounter situations requiring new approaches. Kelrin had been conducting some kind of calculation on his datapad. Actually, if you review the foundational documents from the first navigators, there's explicit language about adapting to discoveries beyond present comprehension. The original framers of our legal system built in flexibility specifically because they recognized their own limitations. That's a very liberal interpretation, Thren argued. It's a textual interpretation, Kelrin countered. I'm literally reading their words. Let those who follow be not bound by our ignorance, but freed by our principles. That's from the Constitutional Founding, Section 3, Paragraph 17. I memorized it for my academy examinations. Thomas had been quietly listening, but now he spoke up. On Earth, we have a saying, hard cases make bad law. It means that when you encounter exceptional situations, you shouldn't create rigid rules based on fear of what might happen. You should address the actual situation in front of you with wisdom and compassion, then see what principles emerge from that specific case. Your species has wise sayings despite being technologically primitive, Draven observed. Interesting. We're really good at philosophy and really bad at not destroying our own planet, Thomas agreed. Humanity excels at contemplating existence while simultaneously making questionable environmental choices. We contain multitudes, mostly contradictory ones. Arya had retrieved her portfolio of drawings from their luggage and was now spreading papers across the obsidian floor. I made pictures of our house, and our street, and Colonel Whiskers, and the park where the squirrels steal food. Grandmother should see where we live if she's going to visit. I haven't agreed to visit Earth, Valendra pointed out, though she moved closer to examine the drawings. You haven't said no either, Arya replied with 4-year-old logic. That's basically a maybe. Daddy says maybe is just yes, waiting for the right moment. Your father says a lot of things. He's very talkative, Arya agreed. Mama says it's because he's a teacher, and teachers can't help explaining everything. She says it affectionately, though, so it's not a complaint. The drawings were enthusiastically chaotic. Stick figures with exaggerated features, a house rendered in impossible proportions, a yellow sun Arya had labeled Sun Only One, with an arrow pointing to it. One drawing showed the family standing in what appeared to be a garden, with a crowned figure drawn in purple crayon, standing among the tomato plants. That's you, Arya explained, pointing at the crowned figure. I put you in our garden because you should see Daddy's tomatoes. He says they're the best in 3-star systems, but he's only actually visited 2-star systems, so his sample size is statistically limited. I learned about sample sizes from watching him grade papers. Valendra stared at the drawing, herself rendered in child's crayon, standing in an earth garden among alien vegetables, with her impossible hybrid family. You included me in your family portrait. Well, your family, Arya said, as if this was obvious. Your mama's mother, which makes you our grandmother, which makes you family. That's how family works. It's not that complicated. Family is extraordinarily complicated, Thren muttered. Only if you make it complicated, Arya countered. Daddy says most complicated things are just simple things that people added extra rules to because they were afraid of change. Thomas winced. I really need to stop having philosophical discussions within Arya's earshot. She retains everything and deploys it at the most inconvenient moments. That's called being an effective learner, Kelrin said approvingly. She synthesizes information and applies it contextually. That's advanced cognitive processing. That's what makes bedtime arguments so exhausting, Lyra said. She uses sophisticated reasoning to challenge every parental decision. Yesterday, she argued that if adults can choose their own bedtimes, mandatory child bedtimes represent age-based discrimination that violates principles of individual autonomy. Draven laughed, a deep sound that seemed to surprise everyone, including himself. She's not wrong, actually. That is age-based discrimination. We just accept it as necessary for child development. Please don't encourage her, Thomas pleaded. She's already writing a treatise on unfair household power structures. I found 17 pages of notes. At 4 years old. I don't know whether to be proud or terrified. Both, Valendra suggested. Definitely both. She looked at the drawing again, at the purple crayon version of herself standing among earth tomatoes, and felt something shift fundamentally in her understanding of what family could mean. When would you like me to visit? The throne room went silent. Even Ethan stopped wiggling. Visit? Lyra repeated carefully. Earth? You want to visit Earth? I have grandchildren I've never spent time with. A son-in-law I've just met who apparently grows exceptional tomatoes and teaches teenagers, despite this being apparently terrible for his sanity. A daughter who disappeared for 5 years and returned with an entire life I know nothing about. Yes, Lyra, I want to visit. Unless you prefer I didn't. No, yes, Lyra stopped, took a breath. I would love for you to visit. The children have been asking about you for years. I've shown them pictures, told them stories, but it's not the same as actually knowing you. Then we'll arrange it, Valendra said decisively. After we address the Council's concerns, establish appropriate legal frameworks for hybrid citizenship, and ensure your family's status is properly documented. Then I will visit Earth, meet this Colonel Whiskers who apparently outranks everyone, and evaluate these legendary tomatoes. 3 months later, Queen Valendra stood in a modest backyard in Wisconsin, wearing civilian clothes that felt uncomfortably informal, watching her grandson attempt to teach their neighbor's dog to fetch using telekinesis. The dog, a large creature called a golden retriever, seemed deeply confused about why the ball kept returning without anyone throwing it. Ethan found this hilarious. He doesn't understand physics, Ethan explained seriously to the bewildered animal. You're supposed to chase the ball. That's your job. I'm just making it more efficient. I don't think the dog appreciates efficiency, Thomas called from where he was tending his tomato plants. Some beings enjoy the journey more than the destination. That's very philosophical for gardening, Valendra observed, moving closer to examine the plants. They were, she had to admit, remarkable specimens. The fruit hung heavy on the vines, deep red and perfectly formed. These are the famous tomatoes. 4 generations of selective cultivation, Wisconsin soil, and what my grandmother called talking to them nice, Thomas said, gently adjusting a vine. I've tried explaining the scientific principles to Lyra, but honestly, half of gardening is just paying attention and hoping for the best. That applies to most things, Valendra said. I've ruled for 40 years using approximately the same methodology. Thomas laughed, the sound easy and genuine. Over the past 3 months of regular communication, and now this week-long visit, Valendra had discovered her son-in-law possessed a remarkable ability to make profound observations sound like casual chat. He'd also taught her to appreciate human coffee, which was simultaneously terrible and essential. Inside the house, Lyra and Arya were attempting to bake something called cookies, a process that involved significant laughter and what sounded like minor property damage. Colonel Whiskers, the alleged military commander of the household, was supervising from a safe distance on top of the refrigerator. The council finalized the amendment last week, Valendra said, watching Ethan demonstrate his juggling skills to the dog. Hybrid citizenship is now officially recognized under Crimson Dominion law. Your children have full legal status in both worlds. I saw the documentation, Thomas said. Lyra cried for 20 minutes when she read it. Happy crying, to be clear, the relieved kind. She was worried. She was terrified. We both were. Bringing the kids here, not knowing if they'd be accepted, if we'd be recognized as a legitimate family. He paused, selecting his words carefully. Thank you. For choosing them. For choosing us. I chose reality over comfort, Valendra corrected. Though I'll admit, reality has proven more interesting than I anticipated. Your neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, invited me to something called a book club. I'm still not entirely sure what it involves, but apparently there's wine. It involves wine and talking about a book nobody actually finished reading, Thomas explained. It's social bonding disguised as literary analysis. You'll fit right in. Arya burst through the back door, white hair flying, holding a plate of smoking objects that might have once been intended as food. Grandmother, we made cookies. They're a little burnt, but Mama says that's how we learn through experimental failure. The cookies were, in fact, aggressively burnt. They looked like they'd been involved in a small industrial accident. Valendra took one anyway, bit into it, and managed not to grimace. Delicious, very crunchy. You don't have to lie, Arya said. They're terrible. But we tried, and trying is important. Also, we learned that ovens are hotter than we thought, which is valuable information for next time. Lyra emerged looking apologetic, flowers somehow in her hair. I'm not sure how she convinced me that we should bake without consulting any recipes or temperature guidelines. Something about experiential learning. She used your own educational philosophy against you, Valendra observed. That's quite sophisticated manipulation for a 4-year-old. 4 3/4, Arya corrected. The 3/4 is important. Also, I prefer to think of it as applied persuasion rather than manipulation. Manipulation sounds mean. Ethan had abandoned the confused dog and was now attempting to climb into the tomato plants, apparently determined to sample them directly from the vine. Thomas redirected him with practiced ease, producing a small container of pre-picked tomatoes that he'd clearly prepared for exactly this scenario. You really do have extensive experience managing chaos, Valendra remarked. 15 years teaching high school, Thomas said. Before that, I thought I understood chaos. Then I encountered 30 teenagers simultaneously texting during a lesson on the Industrial Revolution. That's when I learned true chaos management. Yet you chose to have children anyway. Well, these ones are mine, which makes the chaos more meaningful. Also, they can teleport, which adds an exciting dimension of spatial unpredictability that regular children lack. A commotion from the front yard drew their attention. Kelrin materialized literally via personal teleportation device, looking excited and slightly disheveled. He'd been visiting Earth for the past week, ostensibly as part of Valendra's diplomatic escort, but actually because he wanted to examine human scientific institutions. He was currently wearing a t-shirt he'd acquired from something called MIT that proclaimed, "My other shirt is a Schrödinger equation." Kelrin, Valendra said wearily, we discussed materialization protocols. You're supposed to arrive at designated transport points, not directly into residential neighborhoods. But I have exciting news, Kelrin protested. The Earth scientists at the Genetic Research Institute want to publish a collaborative paper on hybrid psionic development. They've been working with Dr. Chen to map Arya and Ethan's neurological patterns with full parental consent and appropriate ethical oversight, and the results are extraordinary. They're proposing an entirely new model of inherited trait expression. That sounds fascinating, Thomas said, managing to sound genuinely interested despite clearly not understanding half the technical terms. It is. They've asked if I want to co-author, and I've invited 3 of their researchers to visit our laboratories. This could establish ongoing scientific exchange between our civilizations. All because your grandchildren's genetics are so wonderfully weird. Please don't describe my grandchildren as weird, Valendra said, though without real heat. Statistically anomalous? Kelvin tried. Better. Arya had finished distributing burnt cookies and was now showing Kelvin her latest drawings, which included detailed architectural plans for what she described as a house that exists in two places at once using quantum superposition principles. Kelvin was taking her completely seriously and offering technical suggestions. She's designing impossible buildings with our chief science advisor, Lyra observed. This is my life now. Could be worse, Thomas said. She could be designing possible buildings, and then we'd actually have to figure out how to construct them. Valendra found herself smiling, something she'd done more in the past 3 months than in the previous 3 years. Standing in this small earth garden, surrounded by hybrid grandchildren and burnt cookies and confused dogs, she felt something she hadn't experienced since before her husband's death. Simple contentment. Not the satisfaction of successful governance or the pride of political victory, but the quiet joy of family existing together without purpose beyond existence itself. Your Majesty? Captain Varix appeared from around the side of the house, looking uncomfortable in civilian clothes. The Council is requesting your presence via communication link. They have questions about the trade delegation scheduling. Tell them I'm busy, Valendra said. Varix blinked. Busy, Your Majesty? Yes, I'm eating burnt cookies with my grandchildren and learning about earth gardening. The Council can manage without me for another hour. I'll convey that message, Varix said carefully, though her expression suggested this was not how queens typically responded to Council requests. After she left, Thomas offered Valendra a perfectly ripe tomato. You're getting better at this. At what? Being a person instead of a position. He bit into his own tomato, juice running down his chin in a way that would have horrified court protocol officers. Lyra's gotten better at it too. When I first met her, she was so wound up in being the perfect princess that she'd forgotten how to just be. Took her 6 months to stop apologizing every time she laughed too loud. I taught her that, Valendra said quietly. Control over expression, distance over connection. I thought I was preparing her for rule. I was actually teaching her to be lonely. But she unlearned it, Thomas pointed out. And now you're unlearning it too. That's the thing about family. It gives you permission to be imperfect. Ethan had discovered that tomatoes could be juggled and was testing this hypothesis with mixed success. Arya was explaining her quantum architecture plans to an increasingly enthusiastic Kelvin. Lyra had flour in her hair and joy on her face. Mrs. Patterson was peering over the fence, probably wondering why there was an alien scientist in her neighbor's yard. But she waved cheerfully anyway, because apparently that's what neighbors did in Wisconsin. This was family. Messy, chaotic, spanning star systems in species boundaries, held together not by law or tradition, but by choice. By people deciding, again and again, that connection mattered more than protocol. Valendra bit into the tomato. It was, she had to admit, the best tomato she'd ever tasted. All right, she said. I concede. These are exceptional tomatoes. Thomas beamed. Told you, best in 3 star systems. You've still only visited 2 star systems. So far, he agreed, but I'm confident in my projection. Around them, their impossible family continued existing, proving every day that the universe was larger and stranger and more wonderful than any law could anticipate. And Valendra, queen of the Crimson Dominion, stood in a Wisconsin garden eating tomatoes with her human son-in-law, her hybrid grandchildren playing nearby, and discovered that sometimes the best answer to ancient questions was simply to let life provide new ones. Arya appeared at her elbow, tugging her sleeve. Grandmother, next time you visit, can you teach me to do the floaty thing you do with energy crystals? Kelvin says I'm almost ready, but I need proper instruction from someone really good at it. I suppose I could arrange some lessons, Valendra said, pretending to consider it. Yay! Arya threw her arms around Valendra's waist. You're the best grandmother in multiple star systems. I'm the only grandmother you have. That's what makes it a statistically valid statement. Later, as binary suns set over an alien world and Earth's single sun painted Wisconsin gold, Valendra sat on a back porch that had never seen royalty, surrounded by family that shouldn't exist according to 3,000 years of law, and felt more at home than she had in her palace for decades. Change was terrifying. Love was complicated. Family was impossible. And somehow, impossibly, it all worked anyway. The end.